The crystal chandelier hangs overhead like a captured constellation, impossibly bright against the darkening afternoon outside the tall windows. The air smells of expensive perfume, lilies, and the faint, cloying scent of ambition. I stand by the wall, a glass of champagne cold in my hand, watching them. My family, gathered here, in this room, celebrating my sister's bridal shower. And I am Antarctica, a continent of ice in the corner of their world. They laugh, they toast, they pose for photos, their faces flushed with wine and perceived victory. Not one of them meets my eyes for more than a fleeting, dismissive glance. Not one asks me how I am, if I traveled well, if my life, the one lived so far away from their orbit, holds any warmth. The noise of their happiness is a physical weight, pressing down, pushing me further into the periphery. This isn't just ignorance. It's deliberate. It's a performance, and I am the ghost they refuse to acknowledge, haunting the edges of their perfect picture. My hand trembles slightly, and the ice in my glass clinks like tiny, brittle bones breaking. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. My life was never the one they planned. From the moment I chose a different college in a different state, pursuing a degree that made no sense in their world of local marriages and inherited businesses, I became an anomaly, an outlier. My sister, Sarah, she was the blueprint. Pretty, popular, married the right boy from the right family, settled in the right neighborhood. She floated through life on a current of family approval, while I was constantly swimming against the tide. My career, building things, acquiring properties, navigating complex deals in cities they only saw on postcards, it was abstract to them. Unreal. Not like owning the local dealership or marrying a doctor. It didn't fit their narrative of success, which was measured in proximity and predictability. They'd nod vaguely when I mentioned a project, their eyes already scanning the room for someone more relevant. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say, her tone suggesting I'd just shown her a particularly intricate piece of macaroni art. My father would grunt, already thinking about his golf game. Sarah, when she bothered to listen, would offer a saccharine smile. "Oh, that sounds busy," as if building a multi-million-dollar complex was some sort of quaint hobby. I'd tried for years, sending cards, calling on birthdays, flying home for holidays, even when the passive aggression was a physical presence in the room. I craved their acceptance, that simple warmth of belonging that Sarah took for granted, like air. But every interaction was a reminder of the gap. My clothes were too severe, my conversations too technical, my lack of a husband and children a constant, unspoken judgment. This house, this family, felt less like a home and more like a museum, where I was the exhibit labeled "Warning, Deviant." When the invitation arrived, a thick, embossed cardstock radiating elegance and expectation, I hesitated. Sarah's bridal shower. At the Grand Bell Mead. The Grand Bell Mead. Even the name felt heavy with history and exclusivity. It was the place. The place where the town's elites celebrated their milestones, where generations of prominent families had held their events. It wasn't just a venue, it was a statement. A symbol of having arrived, of belonging to a certain strata of society. My mother had mentioned it offhand during a clipped phone call, her voice practically purring with pride. "Sarah's having her shower at the Bell Mead, darling. It's terribly difficult to get a date there, you know." "So exclusive, yes, mother, I know." I knew because I had a history with the Bell Mead that they couldn't possibly imagine. A history that was currently consuming my life, piece by meticulous piece. But they didn't ask about my life. Not really. Still, the invitation sat on my desk, a challenge. A tiny, foolish part of me hoped this time would be different. Maybe for Sarah, for a happy occasion, the ice would thaw. Maybe they would see me not as the disappointment, but as family. I told myself I had to go. For Sarah. For the faint possibility of connection. So I booked the flight, chose a dress I knew they would subtly critique. Too dark, too modern, not girly enough, and prepared myself. Prepared myself for the familiar chill. Stepping into the Grand Bell Mead was like entering a different era, High ceilings, intricate moldings, the hushed elegance of old money. Sunlight streamed through arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was beautiful, undeniably, and it felt like a gilded cage. The air felt thinner here, saturated with unspoken rules and expectations. As I walked through the foyer, past the polite reception staff, I could already hear the distant hum of voices, the clinking of glasses. My heart felt like a small, trapped bird, beating against my ribs. I found the room designated for the shower. A large ballroom, tastefully decorated with white flowers and silver accents. And there they were. Aunts, cousins, family friends, a sea of familiar faces, most of whom I hadn't seen in years. And the core group, mother, father, Sarah, her fiancé, and his family. They were gathered around a table laden with gifts, laughter echoing. I took a deep breath and walked in. The air didn't just feel cold. It felt like I had walked into a vacuum. Conversations that had been lively instantly hushed. Eyes turned towards me, assessed, and then flicked away. A few distant relatives offered tight smiles. My mother saw me. Her smile faltered for a second, then plastered back on, tighter this time. "Oh, look who finally made it," she said, loud enough for nearby people to hear, her tone light but carrying the familiar undertone of disapproval. We were beginning to wonder if you'd gotten lost. No hug, no genuine welcome. Just that barbed greeting. Sarah waved from her seat, a radiant, picture-perfect bride-to-be. "You came," she said, her voice bright, a little too bright. She didn't get up. Neither did my mother. I felt a hot flush crawl up my neck. I managed a smile, walked over, and gave Sarah a quick hug, careful not to wrinkle her dress. Of course, I wouldn't miss it, I lied. I retreated to the edges of the room, finding that corner near the window. The champagne glass was offered by a polite server, a small comfort in this emotional desert. I tried. I really did. I approached my Aunt Carol, who used to bake my favorite cookies. "Aunt Carol, it's so good to see you," she turned, blinked. "Oh, dear, is that you? You've changed. Still working. Wherever it is you work?" She didn't wait for an answer, turning back to her conversation about someone's new grandchild. I tried engaging my cousin Mark, who I used to build tree forts with. "Mark, how have you been? Heard you started that new business," he nodded, distracted, looking over my shoulder. Yeah, it's good. Busy. Look, Brenda's trying to get my attention." He was gone before I could even finish a sentence. It was like trying to grasp smoke. Every attempt to connect, to bridge the distance, was met with deflection, polite dismissal, or outright ignoring. They talked around me. They talked past me. Conversations would be lively, then I'd approach, and they would either stop or shift to a topic that pointedly excluded me, referencing people I didn't know or events I hadn't attended. My mother was the maestro of this subtle exclusion, directing the flow of conversation away from me with a flick of her wrist or a strategically timed interjection. I overheard snippets. "So glad Sarah found someone so grounded, so traditional. It's just wonderful she's staying close to home, raising a family where she has support. Some people just chase other things, I suppose." Each snippet was a tiny needle, pricking at my skin. Other things, my career, my life, reduced to other things. The physical beauty of the venue became a mockery. The elegance highlighted my feeling of being clumsy and out of place. The laughter sounded brittle, the music a discordant noise in my ears. I retreated back to my corner, nursing the cold champagne, watching the performance unfold. This wasn't a family gathering. It was a reaffirmation of their values, their choices, and a quiet, but potent, condemnation of mine. They didn't need to say the words, "We're disappointed in you." They were living them, breathing them, in every averted gaze, every dismissive smile. The hurt was a physical ache, deep in my chest. It was the pain of being erased. Hours crawled by. The gift opening began. Oohs and ahs filled the air as Sarah unwrapped delicate china, expensive linens, crystalware. Each gift was another piece of the life they approved of, a life I hadn't chosen. My gift, a piece of abstract art from a gallery I admired, was met with polite confusion.
Oh, how?
Modern, Mother said, setting it aside quickly, her focus already on the next box containing a traditional silver platter. It wasn't just the gift, it was my taste, my world, being set aside. As the afternoon wore on, a strange shift began to happen within me. The initial pain, the raw hurt of exclusion started to cool. It didn't vanish, but it hardened, like lava cooling into rock. Watching them, seeing the utter lack of empathy, the complete self-absorption in their own narrative, something inside me snapped. Not in an angry way, not in a loud, dramatic way. It was quieter, colder. A realization settled over me, heavy and certain. They would never accept me as I was. They didn't want to understand my life. They just wanted me to conform. And I couldn't. Not anymore. The Grand Bell Mead.
They kept talking about it.
The history.
The prestige.
How hard it was to book. How it represented the best of everything. My father made a toast, raising his glass. To Sarah and Michael, finding love and building a life right here, where they belong. In this town, with family, upholding the traditions that matter. In places like the Bell Mead, which represent everything we cherish, he gestured around the room, his chest puffed out. And in that moment, standing in my corner, invisible, something clicked into place. The Grand Bell Mead. My project. My largest acquisition to date. The historical restoration I'd been working on for the past 18 months. The one that had consumed my nights and weekends. The one they knew absolutely nothing about because they never asked, never cared enough to listen. The deal had closed just last week. Quietly. Under a holding company's name. Part of the deal, a condition of the Historical Society's blessing for the modernization and expansion, was a significant endowment and a renaming. A renaming of the main ballroom wing. The very wing we were standing in. It hit me with the force of a physical blow, but not of pain. Of cold, hard clarity. They were celebrating their values, their status, their exclusion of me, in my house. Or at least in a significant part of it. The irony was so profound, so deliciously, brutally perfect, that a slow, dangerous calm spread through me. The hurt didn't disappear, but it was overlaid with something else. Power. Quiet, hidden, absolute power. They had dismissed my world, reduced it to other things. They had no idea the scale of those other things, no idea that while they were focused on their small-town hierarchy, I had been building empires. Empires that could buy and sell the symbols of their status, like this grand old building. My perspective shifted entirely. I was no longer the hurt child craving approval. I was the architect, standing in the structure I now owned, watching mice scurry in the walls, oblivious to the foundation beneath them. The forced smiles, the dismissive glances, the whispers, they didn't sting anymore. They were just
noise.
The insignificant chatter of people living in a much smaller world than they imagined. I stopped trying to engage. I stopped trying to be seen. I simply existed, present but apart, watching them with a quiet intensity they didn't notice. I listened to their conversations about neighborhood gossip, country club politics, the rising cost of things that seemed trivial from my vantage point. They were so deeply entrenched in their bubble, so convinced of their own importance and the correctness of their lives, that they couldn't conceive of anything beyond it. And they certainly couldn't conceive that the quiet woman in the corner, the family disappointment, was operating on a plane they couldn't even visualize. The deepening crisis wasn't just their ignoring me, it was the suffocating realization of the vast, unbridgeable gulf between us. It wasn't just about this shower, this day. It was about a lifetime of misunderstanding, of being measured against a yardstick I didn't fit, and being found wanting. And standing here, in the Bell Mead, listening to them extolling the virtues of their limited world, while I knew the secrets of the very walls surrounding them, the sense of alienation was absolute. All seemed lost, not in terms of external success. My career was thriving beyond their wildest dreams, but in terms of the family connection I had always yearned for. That I knew now was truly lost. Irrevocably. They didn't want me, They wanted a version of me that didn't exist. And standing in the belly of their beast, invisible, I felt the full weight of that loss. The bridal shower continued its predictable course. More gifts, more toasts, more forced interactions. My sister, Sarah, seemed genuinely happy, albeit a little flustered by all the attention. I watched her, searching for a flicker of the girl who used to share secrets with me under the covers with a flashlight. But she was gone, or perhaps she had never truly existed. She was the perfect product of their world, and my existence was a quiet challenge to its perfection. She didn't look at me with malice, just distance. Like I was a photograph from a life she no longer remembered, or perhaps chose not to. It was near the end of the afternoon. Cake had been cut. Thank yous were being exchanged. People were starting to mill about, preparing to leave. My mother was holding court near the entrance to the ballroom, basking in the success of the event, no doubt already mentally tallying the social points she'd earned by hosting Sarah's shower at the Grand Belmead. My father stood beside her, looking pleased. I had already decided to leave quietly, slip out the side door, and spare myself any further awkwardness. But as I took a step towards the exit, a voice cut through the gentle murmur of conversation. "Excuse me, everyone," a clear, professional voice called out. It was Mr. Harrison, the general manager of the Belmead, a man I knew quite well from the countless hours of negotiations and planning over the past year and a half. He stood near the small stage at the front of the ballroom, holding a microphone. A hush fell over the room. My mother straightened, adjusting her pearls, anticipating some final, elegant announcement, perhaps acknowledging her role as hostess or praising the venue. My father smiled, ready to accept accolades on behalf of the family. Sarah and Michael looked intrigued. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Before you all depart, I wanted to take a moment to make a brief, but very special announcement. As many of you know, the Grand Belmead is undergoing a significant historical restoration and modernization project. This is a landmark undertaking, preserving the legacy of this cherished institution while preparing it for the next century." He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, and I saw a flicker of recognition, perhaps even respect, before he continued. The family seemed impatient, waiting for him to get to the point. What did this have to do with Sarah's shower? This project has been made possible by the extraordinary vision and generous support of a single individual, Mr. Harrison continued, his voice gaining a touch of reverence. Someone who understands the importance of history, architecture, and investing in the future of our community. Their commitment has been instrumental in bringing this ambitious plan to fruition. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. My family looked around, murmuring,
Who was he talking about?
"Some wealthy benefactor they should know." My mother was already scanning the room, trying to identify this important person. "It is with immense pleasure and gratitude that I announce," Mr. Harrison's voice rang out, clear and strong, "that in recognition of their monumental contribution and commitment to this project and the future of the Grand Belmead, this historic ballroom wing," he gestured around the opulent room, "will henceforth be known as my last name, Grand Ballroom." The words hung in the air. The murmuring stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just quiet, it was a complete vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. Every single eye in the room swung towards me, standing in my corner, still holding the now empty champagne glass. My mother's hand flew to her chest, her face draining of color. My father's jaw dropped, his confident smile vanishing, replaced by a look of utter shock and disbelief. Sarah's eyes widened, staring at me as if she had never seen me before. The carefully constructed facades of composure on my family's faces didn't just crack, they shattered. They collapsed. They had been celebrating their status, their belonging, their perceived superiority, in a place that they considered the pinnacle of their world. A place they believed represented them. And in a single sentence, spoken by a man they respected, that place was renamed. Not after the family patriarch, not after a local dignitary they admired, but after me. The black sheep. The disappointment. The one they ignored. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions and the weight of their dawning realization. Their faces were a roadmap of shock, confusion, and something akin to horror. The sheer, brutal irony of it must have hit them like a physical blow. They had made me invisible in my own ballroom. Mr. Harrison, seemingly oblivious to the seismic shift he had just caused in this small pocket of the room, continued speaking, detailing the scope of the project, mentioning the endowment, the public access elements, the community benefits. His words were a distant drone in my ears. All I could see were their faces. My mother's trembling lip. My father's stunned, almost pained expression. Sarah's blank stare. They had built their identities, their pride, on a foundation of perceived status and tradition, and I had just shown them that their foundation was built on sand. I hadn't just achieved success. I had achieved a level of success that intersected with the very symbols of their world, and I had done it quietly, outside their notice, while they were busy dismissing me. There was no triumph in my chest, not a victorious roar.
It was colder than that.
It was a quiet, deep satisfaction, mixed with the lingering ache of the years of pain that had led to this moment. I hadn't sought this specific form of vindication, but standing there, watching their world crumble in real time, I couldn't deny the potent, bittersweet taste of it. Mr. Harrison finished his announcement, and a smattering of polite applause rippled through the room from people who weren't my family, people who just heard the name of a generous benefactor. Then, the noise level began to rise again, but differently this time. Whispers started. Questions. People looking from Mr. Harrison to me, then back to the sign or the space where a sign would be. I wasn't sure if they had unveiled it yet. My mother finally found her voice, a thin, reedy sound that was barely a whisper.
Your
name? She stammered, looking utterly lost. My father just stared, speechless. I didn't need to say anything. The ballroom spoke for me. The weight of my achievement, the scale of the other things I had been doing while they were busy dismissing me, filled the space between us. They had underestimated me, not just slightly but fundamentally. They had judged my life by their narrow standards and found it lacking, never imagining that my world was orders of magnitude larger than theirs. I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was the undeniable satisfaction of seeing their shock, of turning the tables in a way they could never have anticipated. This wasn't just karma, it was a strategic move years in the making, even if the timing was coincidental perfection. But there was also a profound sadness. This moment, this public unraveling, was the final nail in the coffin of any hope for genuine connection. They weren't collapsing in admiration or pride, but in shock and perceived humiliation. My success wasn't a shared joy, it was a threat to their carefully constructed identity. I took another deep breath, the air now thick with unspoken tension. I didn't gloat. There was no need. The reality of the situation was far more powerful than any words I could conjure. I simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible nod in response to my mother's bewildered question. Then I turned and walked towards the exit. This time, no one tried to stop me. No one called out. They were too stunned, too busy processing the implications of the name on the ballroom, the name that belonged to the person they had spent the afternoon ignoring. Stepping outside the Grand Bell Mead, the late afternoon sun felt warm on my skin, a stark contrast to the emotional coldness of the past few hours. The sounds of the city, cars passing, distant sirens, felt real and grounding after the artificial bubble of the shower. I hadn't won a family. I had won a battle. A battle I hadn't explicitly started, but one that had been waged against me for years through subtle dismissals and outright neglect. The victory felt hollow, in some ways. The satisfaction was undeniable, a cold, sharp edge, but it didn't fill the void that their rejection had created. It was vindication, yes, but it came at the cost of accepting that the family I had longed for simply didn't exist. They valued status and conformity over connection and genuine love. And my success, rather than bringing us closer, had only highlighted the chasm. The Grand Bell Mead stood behind me, a majestic building now carrying my name on its most prestigious wing. It was a symbol, not just of my professional achievement, but of my resilience. I had built something significant, something lasting, despite their lack of support, despite their quiet disapproval. I had needed their validation to succeed, and in the end, my success had become the ultimate, unspoken validation of my choices. Walking away, I knew things would never be the same. The dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The black sheep had returned, not asking for a seat at the table, but revealing she owned the very room the table was in. It wasn't the happy ending I might have dreamed of as a child, where they finally saw me and welcomed me with open arms. It was a colder, more solitary victory. A testament to surviving and thriving, not because of them, but in spite of them. The pain of being the ignored sister would always be a part of my story, a scar I carried. But now, it was also the story of the woman who built her own world, so grand and undeniable that it eventually intersected and overshadowed the one that had tried to contain her. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.